Churchill is what? He's hopelessly devoted to Greece. It's the one that he wants. Okay. Huh? But Stalin's heading through Bulgaria now. Like greased lightning. I think I'm not getting something here. What about the Germans? They're being hit by Noah's Ark. I am definitely not getting something here. Okay. Yeah. See ya. September 9th, 1944. We want to be neutral now, they said. Stalin said, I don't care. We never even declared war on you, they said. Stalin said, I don't care. So this week, the Soviet Union invades Bulgaria. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, Romania signed an armistice with the Soviets, even as the Red Army continued clearing the country of Germans. The Warsaw Uprising continued, the Slovak one began. In the west, the Allies entered Belgium. In Italy, they advanced in both east and west, and the Chinese prepared to defend Guangxi province. And Finland broke off diplomatic relations with Germany. And this week on the 4th comes a ceasefire between Finland and the Soviet Union, effective immediately. The Germans begin to leave the country. Most will go to Norway, but 7,000 or so will leave via the Baltic ports. The Red Army continues its advance. On the 4th, they take Brasov, and much of southern Transylvania has been cleared of the Axis. On the 6th, units from Rodion Malinovsky's 2nd Ukrainian Front reached the Yugoslavian border at Tornu-Severin on the Danube. This has been a really rapid advance, and combined with the success of Operation Rat Week, which I mentioned last week, the RAF and Partisan operation to destroy roads and rails in Yugoslavia that might be used for German troops evacuating Greece or Bulgaria, means that the Germans won't really be able to evacuate large numbers of troops from the Balkans to help out in Italy or Central Europe. Not without huge difficulty and huge loss, anyhow. For Tito and his partisans, now numbering tens of thousands, the time had come to liberate their own land and to fight side by side with Soviet troops against German military strongpoints. Hitler, seeing clearly that the time could not be long distant before one or other of the Allies was on German soil, ordered an editorial in the Nazi Party newspaper Völkischer Beobachter, which declared on September 7th, "Not a German stalk of wheat is to feed the enemy, not a German mouth to give him information, not a German hand to give him help. He is to find every footbridge destroyed, every road blocked. Nothing but death, annihilation, and hatred will meet him." Bulgaria wants to end things with Germany too. On the 4th, new Bulgarian Prime Minister Konstantin Moraviev releases a statement that Bulgaria rejects the Tripartite Pact and the Anti-Comintern Pact. He says Bulgarian troops will be pulled out of Axis-occupied countries, and he'll speed up talks with the British and Americans to sort out an armistice with them. But Bulgaria will be strictly neutral with respect to the Soviet-German war. However, that would mean excluding the Soviets from any peacemaking operations, and that is a no-no to Joseph Stalin. So the next day, the Soviets declare war on Bulgaria without consulting their allies, with the claim that Moraviev's declaration of neutrality is just de facto waging of war in the camp of Germany against the Soviet Union. Moraviev tells them he's severed all ties with Germany and asks for an armistice with the Soviets. Meanwhile, the Fatherland Front prepares a coup. They've been around for a couple of years, a Bulgarian resistance organization against the Germans, originally with many different ideologies, but by now mainly pro-communist. On the 7th, with the German forces mostly leaving the country, Moraviev declares war on Germany. Bulgaria is technically at war with Germany, the Soviet Union, the USA, and Britain at the same time. That is a tough fight to win. Anyhow, it is too little too late. On the 8th, Soviet troops enter Bulgaria. Today, they enter the port of Varna. Bulgarian warships offer no resistance, and German ones scuttle themselves. By the evening, Fyodor Tolbukhin's 3rd Ukrainian Front forces are already along the line from Ruza to Burgas. At 9 p.m., though, they are ordered to suspend operations as the Fatherland Front has overthrown the Bulgarian government. It pledges friendship with the Soviet Union. Colonel Kimon Georgiev heads the new government. They call for the arrest of the Regency Council and the members of the Muraviev government. But what of all the German troops further down in Greece and the Greek islands? In late August, in the islands, for example, there were as many as 70,000 Germans on Crete and some 23,000 on various Aegean islands. Now, getting these guys to the mainland should be a real problem for the Germans, right? What with the RAF and Royal Navy's total dominance in the area. In July, the RAF sank 5,364 tons of German shipping there. But in August, that number drops to just 752. And between August 25th and next week on the 15th, the Germans transport, by ship, 7,200 soldiers, 93 big guns, 2 tanks, and 1,190 other vehicles to the mainland. They also transport during this time by air over 60,000 men from Crete and over 15,000 from Aegean Islands on 100 Junkers transport planes to the mainland. During this period, German convoys are left almost unmolested and air raids suspended. And it is next week on the 15th that air raids begin again and pretty much immediately destroy half of those transports. So why would the British seemingly let the Germans get across to Athens to join the bulk of their forces? And then why suddenly decide to destroy their planes next week? Okay, a lot of this goes to Winston Churchill. See, despite Soviet assurances to the contrary, he still suspects that the rapid Soviet advance is going to push all the way to Greece. I mean, they are cruising through Bulgaria and they rejected Bulgarian neutrality. He's also worried that even if the Soviets do not do so, and once the Germans are gone from Greece, there will be no force strong enough to protect EAM, Elas from taking power there. EAM, E-A-M, being the National Liberation Front, the main organ of Greek resistance, and Elas being its military wing. So, apparently, British intelligence and the SOE have been in contact with members of the Greek collaborationist government and even German officers to try to secure a peaceful transition of power from the Germans to the British or the British supported. Thing is, this week on the 5th, Hitler not only forbids such contact, as you might guess, but orders Greek infrastructure destroyed. Next week on the 14th, Maximilian von Weiss, commanding Army Group F, passes the order on. You see, OKW figures the British are not hassling the German retreat from Greece because they want the Germans to fight the Soviets in the Balkans, preventing them from pursuing any plans to enter Greece long enough for the British to secure a Western-friendly government in Greece. So the Germans do whatever they can to heat up the tension between EAM, Elas, and the British. They also managed to secure safe passage for their departure from Athens in exchange for Helmut Felmy, 68th Army Corps commander, declaring Athens an open city to spare it from destruction. But that does not include Piraeus. I will touch on this more over the coming months, but it's going to be covered in more depth in the War Against Humanity series. The evacuating Germans are, however, being hassled and will continue to be hassled by Operation Noah's Ark, the second such named operation, which began last week on the 31st. Alexander Löhr's Army Group E, which comes under F's command, has nearly 350,000 troops in 4 corps, some 33,000 sailors manning coastal batteries, and like 12,000 AA gunners and airmen. And this operation calls for Greek guerrillas hitting them heavily as they make their way to Yugoslavia. Well, one corps heads into Albania, where they will be heavily hit by Albanian partisans. There is partisan activity all over. In Warsaw, the Warsaw Uprising continues. On the 6th, Polish insurgent command in the city cables out. Warsaw has lost all hope of help from Allied air deliveries or from a Soviet advance that would liberate the city. The Germans are busy clearing the bank of the Vistula this week, so there isn't much hope of the Poles reaching the Red Army units fighting their way into the Praga suburb. But guess what? Today, on the 9th, the Soviets send a note to the British ambassador in Moscow that, while it once more disassociates the Soviets from the uprising and all forms of responsibility, also announces Soviet airdrops into Warsaw and that Allied planes dropping in supplies can use Soviet airfields as long as they agree on operational plans in advance. And the Soviet troops have indeed been on the move around the Warsaw region. The Don Tank Corps forces the Narew at Pultusk, north of Warsaw, the 5th, and Konstantin Rokossovsky's 1st Belarusian Front is trying to break into Praga. Doing so would draw them up on the Vistula facing Warsaw. The latter stages of the week, they're getting into position, and they will attack tomorrow. As for the Slovak Uprising, which began last week, Soviet 1st Ukrainian Front Commander Ivan Konev plans on sending the 38th Army with the 1st Czechoslovak Corps attached through the Dukla Pass into Slovakia. And the 1st and 2nd Slovak divisions are to fight their way out to meet them. But those divisions, as we saw last week, no longer exist. But Stavka, who doesn't know that, approves this plan on the 4th. The thing is, from the 5th, the Soviets are airdropping in a lot of weapons and ammo for the Slovak insurgents. Now, only 16,000 or so of the 60,000 or so men of the Slovak army have been willing and able to join them, but a general mobilization by the National Council has added 25,000 to this, and there are well over 3,000 Soviet partisans also helping out. So the German idea that they can steamroll the uprising in a few days is mistaken. The Germans do take a few towns midweek, trapping the insurgents north of the Váh, but in a bunch of cases, the Slovaks hold off the Germans, and Konev's offensive begins the 8th against the 2 German corps holding the Krosno-Dukla axis. Those defenders, however, are 20,000 men with 200 big guns in well-prepared defenses. All approaches to the mountain passes are, of course, mined, and there are loads of tank traps and things like that. The attackers do make progress at first, but the going gets tough later in the day, and the Germans bring in both infantry and armored reinforcements. Today, the breach the Soviets have opened is closed. Soviet rifles have entered Krosno, but German reinforcements by the end of the day have doubled what their strength was the 8th, and Konev realizes he is going to have to rethink his attacks. So the Allies have entered Slovakia and Bulgaria this week. And you know what? They've also entered Belgium. On the 3rd, Brussels is freed by the British Second Army. This is the 5th anniversary of Britain's declaration of war on Germany. For the Germans, this means that Gustav Adolf von Sangen's 15th Army is now pretty much surrounded in the lower Scheldt River area. That day, the US 1st Army has also advanced into Belgium via Mons. So it's parts of 6 divisions that have been surrounded at the border area, and 25,000 men surrendered to the Allies. On the 4th, the British 11th Armored Division enters Antwerp, and the Belgian resistance helps the Allies take the port installations, but they can't take the canal crossings that dominate the port. This is actually part of Adolf Hitler's plan. He has ordered his forces to hold Walcheren Island and Breskens at the mouth of the Scheldt, which 15th Army units have done, which renders the port of Antwerp unusable to the Allies for bringing in troops and supplies. So they have to rely on ever longer supply lines going back to Normandy. Ultra intercepts alert the Allies that Hitler does not plan any quick retreat from the Netherlands. But even so, on the 5th, the British Joint Intelligence Committee predicts that German resistance everywhere might end by or before December 1st. Winston Churchill thinks Hitler will likely keep fighting into 1945. The enormous German losses in the West suggested that the war was now nearing its end, fueled by the fact that Romania now declared war on Germany and that Bulgaria was calling for peace negotiations. As far as the theater of war in France was concerned, the Allies estimated that OB West had already lost between 400,000 and 500,000 men, as well as some 20,000 motorized vehicles, 1,500 tanks, and 3,500 artillery pieces. That source also lists what the Allies have in the West just now: 21 American, 12 British, and 3 Canadian divisions for 1,234,000 Americans and 825,000 Imperial troops, 1 French division, 1 Polish division, nearly 7,700 tanks, and nearly 13,000 planes of various types. Schaef calculates that in a month or so, they will have a full 54 divisions in Western Europe. But what they have now uses 20,000 tons of supplies per day. On top of having to bring everything long distance for the armies, the Allies also have to organize supplies for Paris, liberated August 25th, which is 5,000 tons of stuff each and every day. What's it going to be like in a couple months when the weather turns and you can only bring supplies into the Norman coast at certain times? And over half of all supplies are still coming into the artificial harbors there. The real causes of the emerging supply problem lay with the fact that Schaef's assumption that after the landing the Allied troops would manage to drive back their enemy on a continuous basis did not prove correct. This meant that until the breakout was made at the end of July, increasing quantities of supplies accumulated in a bridgehead that was far too small. After that, however, the operations proceeded at such speed that there was no time to set up efficient depots and workshops in the liberated areas. Although the Allies and the French were feverishly at work building up the infrastructure in the liberated parts of the country, they lagged far behind in repairing rail and road networks and laying a pipeline to the front. At the end of August, more than 160 ships could not be unloaded because they just did not have the port facilities. 6,000 trucks have been loading and driving round the clock, but they don't make up for the shortage in rail transport, and a lot of them have broken down by now. Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower's staff has ordered bombers to stop targeting railway installations in the still German-occupied areas, thinking that's going to do more harm to the Allies than the Germans in the long run. Well, on the 4th, the Allies liberate Etaples, Lille, Malines, Antwerp, Namur, and Charleroi. With the liberation of Belgium rapidly proceeding, Brussels radio announces that day that Germany has surrendered. This is not the case, though there are big celebrations when the fake news spreads to Britain. Also that day, U.S. Third Corps arrives in the European theater. On the 6th, the British liberate Ghent, and the Canadians reach the Channel south of Calais. The 7th, both the British and the Americans cross the Albert Canal east of Antwerp. The 8th, the Americans take Liège, and the Canadians take Ostend and Newport. The Belgian government in exile returns to Belgium from London, and today, the Canadians take Bruges. In the south of France, on the 3rd, Lyon is freed by the French 1st Infantry Division. French 2nd Corps just marches right in. The resistance began an uprising there, and the Germans just left. 7th Army Commander Alexander Patch has been planning to pause after this to regroup, but 6th Corps Commander Lucien Truscott doesn't want to give the retreating Germans any sort of respite, so what's left of 19th Army has been driven back to the Doubs at Besançon by the 6th. The Germans are being pushed back in Italy as well. On the 3rd, the Canadians cross the Conca. From the beginning of last week to the 4th, the Canadian 1st Infantry and 5th Armored Divisions advanced 25 kilometers, but their advance is halted. Christian Jennings points out in At War on the Gothic Line that this is because of three things. 1. The Germans and their artillery dug in on the Coriano and San Fortunato ridges. The Allies can't hit Rimini until these are taken, since the big guns there command the whole line of advance. And these are tough defenses. 2. The coastal road and Riccione are well defended by the German 1st Parachute Division. 3, and kind of most interesting, Lieutenant General Oliver Leese had fallen into the trap the Germans had laid for him. Leese should have ordered his men to bypass Rimini in a fluid semicircular outflanking movement, and then concentrated on getting to the flatlands of the Po Valley before the autumn rains came, and move troops to occupy Rimini last. He would also have been able to trap the forces south and southeast of the city, yet he chose to do the opposite. Well, hindsight is hindsight, but he does have a point. The Allies don't really need Rimini for anything, because the Poles captured the deep-water port at Ancona in July. So instead of outflanking Rimini, they are forced into 3 corridors that the Germans defend heavily. There are also torrential rains this week, so the ground kind of looks like the bogs of the Western Front in the Great War. In spite of this, German commander smiling Albert Kesselring has been considering abandoning Rimini, but one of his generals has ordered 2 crack regiments to reinforce Germano and the middle of the Coriano Ridge. So the Allies are pretty well blocked advancing on Rimini from any route but up the coast at the moment. And today, in far northern Italy, the German army and the Italian fascists sign an agreement with the Italian partisans that all German and fascist forces are to be pulled out of Domodossola and the nearby valleys. You know, it's not just in Normandy where they've been trying to figure out a future attack plan. I've talked several times about the debate and controversy over the direction the Allies, mainly the Americans, will take to reach Japan, and Douglas MacArthur being adamant that they must liberate the Philippines and not instead attack Formosa before assaulting the Japanese islands. Well, it's taken some time, but U.S. Naval Chief Ernest King has finally agreed, reluctantly, to an assault on Luzon in the Philippines, since it would require fewer men than a full assault on the Japanese coastal defenses of Formosa. This week on the 8th, the Joint Chiefs issue the directive to Southwest Pacific Command that December 20th is the date for landings on Leyte. And in the field, from the 6th to the 8th, 16 carriers of Mark Mischer's Task Force 38 attack Palau. They do this in preparation of an invasion, which is set to go off next week. But with the decision to go for the Philippines plan, the Palau Islands don't really have much strategic value anymore, though the Americans plan to build an airbase there. But the die has been cast, and next week the landings are set to go off. Also, today and tomorrow, 12 of those carriers attack Mindanao airfields. Mindanao is the second largest of the Philippine islands. Actually, on the 7th, an American sub sinks the Japanese freighter Shinto Maru off the Mindanao coast. The sub does not know that there are 675 American POWs on board being moved to Japan. 85 survive and manage to swim to shore. I went over the situation in China a bit last week as the Japanese prepare to attack Guangxi from Hunan. Today, the 9th, the Japanese crossed the provincial border. They have more force than the Chinese expect. While 6 Japanese army divisions had expanded their control over southwestern Hunan bordering Guangxi, 4 additional divisions are sent from the southeast and headed towards Liujiao, which lies south of Guilin. Chiang, still conceived of the Japanese army as an arrow of spent force, viewed the Guangxi army and militia as sufficient for defensive purposes, particularly after he had agreed to the evacuation of Cheng Munong's 93rd Army. He agreed to that last week, to fortify Guilin over Quanzhou. And here are some notes to end the week. On the 4th, Operation Outward finally ends after nearly 2.5 years. I talked about this when it began. This is the British sending out hydrogen balloons trailing wires or carrying incendiaries over mainland Europe to destroy power lines and start fires. 99,142 balloons have been launched in the operation. On the 5th, the Benelux Customs Union is established by leaders in exile of Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. This is to create a common economic community among them. The 8th sees the first successful German V-2 rocket operational use. This is a bit of irony for the British, though, for on the 7th, the British government announces that the German V-1 flying bomb danger has passed. And the morning of the 8th, that's in the British papers. 3 people die from the first 2 rocket bombs that day, but news of that is kept secret by the British government. Details will eventually be released by the New York Times in a month or so. On the 9th, Charles de Gaulle forms the provisional French government. This is the new French cabinet. And that is the week, with Belgium largely liberated, advances in Italy, the Soviets overrunning Romania and invading Bulgaria, Finland saying no more, and the Germans trying to get out of Greece. Boy, the face of the war, at least the one in Europe, has really changed dramatically the past couple of weeks, you know? And in the Germans' disfavor, Belgium and much of France liberated and Finland out of the war, Bulgaria lost to the Soviets, Romania declaring war against Germany, but V-2 rockets are here. Adolf Hitler has said several times that they are going to win the war. So maybe losing huge chunks of occupied territory, losing allies, having allies declare war on you, maybe none of that is a big deal after all. Maybe. If you want to see a bit of what life was like in Greece under Nazi occupation, here is a War Against Humanity episode from August last year to fill you in. Big thanks today, big shout out goes to Valantis Athanasio. He helps us with a bunch of research on Greek stuff for this series and for War Against Humanity. And if you want to see more of this great stuff, you can join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.